This video is sponsored by Delete Me. Commander Joseph Enright couldn't believe what filled his periscope. It was a chance at redemption for the officer who'd let Shokaku escape a year before. In the Pacific waters south of Tokyo Bay, Enright brought USS Archerfish close to the target to get a better look. It was an enormous Imperial carrier, nearly 900 feet according to his calculations, 3 times the size of his own vessel. Fresh paint gleamed on her hull in the moonlight. No weathering, no battle damage. 3 battered destroyers screamed her, but the carrier herself looked brand new. This made no sense. It was late 1944. Japan hadn't launched a capital ship in 2 years. Their shipyards were supposedly destroyed. The Imperial Navy was down to old destroyers and wooden kamikaze boats. Yet here was the largest warship Enright had ever seen, changing course every few minutes. It was zigzagging. No, it was running scared. Whatever this was, wherever it came from, the Japanese were desperate to get it to safety. But first, they'd have to get past Archerfish, and a man not willing to fail twice. For 4 years, Shinano remained hidden behind walls, rooftops, and military patrols. Its location was one of the war's best-kept secrets. But in today's world, keeping your dealings secret is almost impossible. While you're watching this video, data brokers are quietly collecting and selling personal information. Names, phone numbers, home addresses, even data tied to your relatives across hundreds of websites. And most people have no idea it's happening. That's why our team uses Delete Me, a service that finds and removes your personal data from the web and then ensures it doesn't resurface. After signing up, our privacy report revealed just how much of our information was already out there. Old addresses, phone numbers, and even profiles we didn't know existed. Delete Me's experts do the heavy lifting, submitting removals, monitoring for repopulation, and updating reports regularly, so we know exactly what's being removed. It's hands-free, and it works. If you create content, work in a sensitive field, or simply want peace of mind, we recommend checking it out. There's also a family plan, because once your info is exposed, your family's often is too. Click the link in the description and use code DARKSEAS to get 20% off. The more data that's out there, the more vulnerable you are. Act early. The new queen of the Imperial Navy. Late in World War II, with B-29s firebombing its cities and U.S. submarines choking its supply lines more than ever, Japan's crumbling empire was desperately searching for any solution to halt the American advance toward the home islands. In this desperate hour, the Japanese Imperial Navy clung to one final hope: a single warship of unprecedented size and power. This latest venture lay not in a new design, but in a warship already under construction. Laid down in 1940, Battleship No. 110 was originally meant to be the 3rd Yamato class, following sisters Yamato and Musashi, until the High Command ordered her half-built hull to be converted into the ultimate aircraft carrier, via a significant structural transformation that included the installation of a full flight deck, carving out hangar spaces, and retrofitting countless systems for air operations. Now, she had a new name, Shinano, after Japan's largest island province. But the ship's survival depended on absolute secrecy. A single reconnaissance photo, or one intercepted message that revealed her location in Yokosuka's dry dock No. 6, would mean the Americans would reduce her to twisted steel before she ever tasted seawater. Because of this, the shipyard became a sealed world, with concrete walls around the construction site, topped with a roof to blind aerial observation, and military police prowling the perimeter at all hours, watching for any breach of security. Each and every one of the workers who had on-site living quarters was well aware of the severe punishment awaited those who mentioned the project. Most importantly, the Imperial Navy also counted on the element of surprise, the mighty Shinano materializing off the Philippines without warning, ready to shatter American confidence. Accordingly, while other warships left behind thousands of construction photographs, the ship was completed in near total darkness, with a single blurry snapshot taken during sea trials being the only glimpse of the ship in motion. The floating city. Designed to strike Allied forces across the Pacific, Shinano was packed with advanced technology, while her hull featured extensive compartmentalization dividing the ship into countless watertight sections. In addition, an integrated damage control system presumably made it nearly impossible for her to sink. For defense, she mounted 16 dual-purpose guns with a range of 16,100 yards, capable of firing 8 rounds a minute, while 15 triple-mount anti-aircraft guns could spray 110 rounds a minute at incoming aircraft. Inside her vast hangar, there was enough space for up to 4 dozen fighters for fleet defense. But more than that, Shinano's true purpose was to serve as a floating city, carrying enough spare aircraft, ammunition, fuel, and repair facilities to keep Japan's carrier forces operational at sea. Yet, on October 8, 1944, as Shinano prepared for her first taste of seawater, fate delivered an ominous warning. While the workers were in the midst of final details for the launch, the 5,000-ton caisson, a massive steel gate that held back the waters of Tokyo Bay and kept the dry dock sealed, failed catastrophically. Following a grinding crack, seawater exploded through the breach in a thundering wail, lifting Shinano's 70,000-ton hull as if it were mere driftwood. In a cataclysmic chain sequence, dozens of mooring lines snapped like rifle shots. Steel cables thick enough to hold heavy battleships tore loose as Shinano lunged forward on the rising flood, her bow slamming into the dock's concrete headwall with a force that shook the yard to its core. The surge then yanked her backward, driving her sides against the dock walls. As the water rose around them, terrified workers scrambled up ladders and gangways, while the massive carrier pitched and rolled in the confined space, like a giant trapped in a flooding cage. While there were no human casualties, Shinano's bow had suffered significant damage and was in immediate need of repair. But despite the secrecy, such a violent incident could not be hidden. So as repair work began, superstitious whispers spread through all of Yokosuka's yards. No one dared say it aloud, but many believed the ship was already cursed. The flavor of an ancient samurai. Finally, on November 19, 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy commissioned its secret weapon in a rushed ceremony at Tokyo Bay. That same afternoon, an American B-29 reconnaissance bomber swept over Tokyo at high altitude. Its cameras clicked away, taking images of the harbor below and capturing the first real look of Japan's latest ship. In response, the increasingly nervous staff officers at Naval General Staff Headquarters made the decision that Shinano had to leave immediately for Kure, where she could complete her fitting out away from prying American eyes. Leading Shinano would be Captain Toshio Abe, a Naval Academy graduate who survived Midway while commanding a destroyer, bringing hard-won experience to his new post. A man of even temper, strict but unconcerned with ceremony. According to his newly assigned medical officer, Lieutenant Commander Takamasa Yasuma, Abe was a captain, quote, expressing the flavor of an ancient samurai. He seemed to be a man of strong will and apparently was respected by his officers and men. This discipline would be tested immediately, as upon inspecting his ship for the very first time, Captain Abe was struck by just how unfinished the ship truly was. When the Imperial Navy greenlit the conversion of a half-built battleship into a heavily armored carrier meant to ferry countless munitions to the fleet, especially on such a rushed timeline, designers and workers had taken many shortcuts to keep the project moving. Abe spotted cables forcibly shoved through bulkheads, with gaps left unsealed where seawater could pour in unchecked. The vessel's ventilation ducts were unfinished, and the firefighting system was dry, with empty pipes and uninstalled pumps. Though portable emergency pumps were scattered in storage, only a few crewmen knew how to use them. But the most concerning issue of all was the engine room. Of 12 boilers, only 8 worked. Abe trusted just 6. At best, Shinano could manage 2/3 of her intended speed, assuming nothing else broke down. So when Captain Abe was ordered to sail by November 28th, the uneasy leader requested more time, only for Tokyo to vehemently refuse. Shinano would sail, no matter what. Time to go. November 28th, 1944, arrived cold and gray. Days earlier, the 3 destroyers assigned to Shinano's escorts, Yusakaze, Yukikaze, and Hamikaze, limped into Tokyo Bay, their hulls still bearing scars from Leyte Gulf, and their crews hollow-eyed from combat. Though Abe would have preferred to delay departure, giving his exhausted destroyer crews a few more hours rest and training. With no fighter escort available from the Navy General Staff, he had no choice but to sail that morning. As her engines rumbled to life precisely at 9 a.m., the carrier that embodied Japan's last hope for the Pacific slipped her moorings and headed for open water. Her destination, Kure, for final preparations before combat deployment to the Philippines and Okinawa. That day, the carrier's complement numbered 2,175 officers and sailors, joined by 300 shipyard workers still installing equipment and 40 civilian technicians. Instead of her intended air wing of 20 fighters, 20 bombers, and 7 reconnaissance planes, within her carrier deck were only 6 Shinyo kamikaze boats and 50 Oka rocket-powered manned missiles. The others would be supplied upon arrival. Shinano's first trip was so important to the Naval Command that Abe was slated for promotion to Rear Admiral once the fitting out was complete. From her flying bridge, a portrait of Emperor Hirohito, installed just hours before departure, overlooked the crew. Inside the larger-than-life ship, her magazines held barely enough ammunition for one engagement, while her storerooms contained provisions for nothing more than a short voyage. All throughout her, incomplete watertight doors stood propped open, as navigating Shinano's maze of passages would have been nearly impossible otherwise, according to Second-in-Command Executive Officer Mikami. As she headed into the water, the 16-hour journey before them, knowing the ship would reach the most dangerous waters after nightfall, Abe's navigators plotted a course through waters the Imperial Navy still considered relatively safe. But they would soon be proven wrong. A man with a purpose. A few months before, as Japan's secret supercarrier took shape inside the sealed walls of Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in the summer of 1944, Captain Joseph Enright was sitting behind a desk on the United States Navy's Midway submarine base, grieving, grounded, and convinced the war was passing him by. His first wartime command of USS Dace back in 1943 ended in disappointment when overcaution cost him a perilous shot at the carrier Shokaku. After returning to base without firing a single torpedo, Enright requested his own relief. Only months later, he received even worse news. His mother had passed away while he was stationed on the other side of the world. One late summer evening, as the heat settled over the base, Enright found himself at a quiet poker table with Captain Barney Pace, a senior officer under Admiral Lockwood, commander of the American submarine force. All through the night, Pace watched Enright play with cool confidence, pushing chips into the pot with boldness. After a few hands, his superior leaned in and said, quote, "Okay, Joe, I like your spirit. You can have the next available submarine." That ship was USS Archerfish, a Belau-class submarine. Stretching a mere 311 feet as she glided through the Pacific depths at only 1,500 tons, she was dwarfed by the giants above. However, her 10 torpedo tubes made her a dangerous asset. And yet, all this sub had to show for her first 4 patrols were minor victories and missed opportunities. After taking the helm, Skipper Enright guided her to Pearl Harbor for a complete overhaul, where provisions were loaded, torpedoes replaced, and part of her tired crew rotated for fresh hands. On October 30th, 1944, Archerfish slipped her moorings and headed west into the Pacific, her new captain and her crew alike hungry for action. For the next several weeks, Archerfish prowled the waters near Japan's coast on lifeguard duty, waiting to rescue downed bomber crews. But the skies remained quiet. Finally, when the planned B-29 raids over Japan were canceled on November 11th, Enright was free to hunt at last. On November 28th, at 8:48 p.m., the radar operator aboard Archerfish detected a small bump on the horizon, 12 miles to the northeast. Peering through binoculars, the skipper saw the shape of a massive and impossible-to-ignore ship zigzagging in the water. Enright was completely out of breath. This was the strangest profile he'd ever seen. Not quite a battleship, too large for a transport, and too distinctive to be anything in the recognition manuals. Then came the escorts, a trio of destroyers cutting white wakes as they wove their protective screen around the elusive and precious ship. The chance he'd been waiting for over a year was finally here, and this time, Commander Enright would not hesitate. The enemy's reach. Earlier that evening, An officer aboard Shinano approached Captain Abe with a troubling report. The ship's electronic monitoring equipment had intercepted signals consistent with American submarine radar. Now certain that an enemy submarine was nearby, Abe ordered extra lookouts to the railings and turned to his navigator, Captain Nakamura, who confirmed recent reports of American submarines departing Saipan and Guam, and warned it was likely several were already hunting off the Japanese coast. For his part, Abe began to consider another very real possibility, that this submarine was deliberately revealing herself to draw off the escorts, while others waited unseen, ready to strike. As his team began preparing contingency plans in case of an encounter, the 3 battered destroyers screening Shinano felt painfully few to Abe. All 3 showed hasty repairs, ranging from patched hulls to twisted railings. Kamikaze and Isakaze were operating blind, their radar and sonar smashed. Furthermore, his ship remained incomplete and vulnerable. Below, Executive Officer Mikami walked Shinano's passages with mounting dread, as he noted the watertight compartments had never been pressure tested, and that no evacuation drills had been officially run for the ship's confusing maze of passageways. Meanwhile, miles away, Enright continued to study the massive shape floating in the water. The Americans knew the Musashi battleship was gone, sunk at Leyte Gulf, and Yamato had barely survived. The skipper surmised this could only be a top-secret project, something brand new from deep within Yokosuka's shipyards. And whatever it was bigger than anything he'd seen through a periscope before. The American called for his second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Bob Bobchinski, and together they bent over the chart table, plotting their approach. Enright planned to pull west, staying out of the moonlight where the horizon might betray them, and using the clouds rolling in from the coast for cover. If the carrier followed standard Japanese tactics, she would, at some point, finish her zigzags and swing back onto her original course toward Kure, Japan's main fleet base on the inland sea. That was precisely where Archerfish would be waiting. Breaking off. In Abe's mind, however, the trap was glaringly obvious. This submarine was bait. The skipper then ordered a turn away from the contact, counting on his 2-knot speed advantage to leave the enemy behind. In addition to this, the skipper was confident in his knowledge about American torpedoes, which remained inferior and prone to malfunction, especially their faulty magnetic detonators. Watching the situation unfold, Abe remembered the warning he gave his destroyer captains before departure: maintain tight formation, even going as far as explicitly telling them, quote, "If I believe an escort has left her assigned position, I will call for her immediate return. The signal will be made by Shinano's red truck light, which will be turned on and off for about 10 seconds. I strongly suggest that you do not make this signal necessary." And now, the very mistake he had warned against was about to unfold before his eyes. At precisely 10:45 p.m., the bridge phone rang with an urgency. In the call, one of the lookout's voices crackled through. "Contact, 9 miles, starboard bow." Binoculars snapped up across the bridge as Abe pushed through his officers to reach the lookout platform. Finally, there she was, an American submarine running boldly on the surface, her low profile cutting through the swells. Before Abe could issue a single command, before he could even lower his binoculars, movement caught his eye. Isakaze, his lead destroyer, without orders or any type of authorization, had abandoned her screening position and was accelerating hard toward the contact, working up to 35 knots and racing away from the one thing she was supposed to protect. From one moment to another, Abe felt his carefully orchestrated defense dissolve in that instant. Isakaze's skipper, Captain Shintani, had fallen for the oldest trick in the American playbook and followed a bait submarine. The man would pay, court-martial, and loss of command. Abe would see to it personally. Now he had no choice but to use the very signal he'd warned his men should never be necessary. Close call. Back on the submarine, Enright was tracking the mysterious ship through his periscope when his lookout shouted that the lead destroyer had broken away from the carrier and was charging straight at them, her bow wave glowing like a phosphorescent streak in the darkness. General quarters alarms shrieked through Archerfish's compartments as men scrambled to battle stations. The destroyer closed to 3 miles, her guns trained on their position. Through it all, Enright gripped the periscope handle so hard his knuckles turned white, waiting for the first muzzle flash. Instead, a sudden bright red light erupted from the carrier's main mast, holding steady and glowing in the darkness for several long seconds before winking out. The effect of this sudden signal was immediate. Isakaze heeled over hard, abandoning her attack to swing back toward the carrier, resuming her screaming position as if the whole charge had never happened. The strange signal left Enright puzzled. Whatever it meant, it had just saved Archerfish from certain detection and brought them a few precious seconds before the pursuit resumed. Overhead, the massive ship gleamed in bright moonlight. A perfect target. But only if the geometry held. Just before midnight on November 28, 1944, about 100 miles south of Tokyo Bay, Captain Enright sent an urgent message to Pearl Harbor, reading, quote, "I'm pursuing a large aircraft carrier." Precisely at midnight, Archerfish swung to 270 degrees, sliding into parallel with Shinano's track 9 miles to the south. Now, everything depended on the carrier returning to her base course. When she did, she would sail straight into the Americans' trap. Time to strike. For hours, Archerfish tracked her quarry through the darkness. Enright and Bobchinski bent over their plotting table, tracking each zigzag, anticipating where Shinano would return to base course as she headed toward Kure. By then, the memories of Shokaku lingered in Enright's mind, the carrier that had slipped through his sights a year earlier, costing him his command. But tonight was different. This giant had slowed, her speed advantage gone. Still, the old dilemma remained: surface and risk detection, or stay submerged and fall behind. For now, all Archerfish could do was shadow and wait. At 2:56 a.m., Enright raised his binoculars and saw that his target was turning, swinging southwest directly into their trap. Mere minutes later, USS Archerfish, motors silent, slipped beneath the Pacific Ocean and began to creep ahead at the convoy, angling for the perfect shot. Once at a depth of 60 feet, Enright made an unusual call. He ordered the torpedoes set for just 10 feet, a far shallower figure than standard doctrine. It was a tactic he learned from his old superior, Rear Admiral Dobbin. Punch holes high in a carrier's hull, where the weight of the flight deck would help pull the ship over. The skipper also knew his Mark 14 torpedoes often ran deeper than their settings. If they held true, they would strike high. If not, they would still hit vital machinery below the waterline. Then, the enemy turned 30 degrees to port, her massive hull swinging into a full broadside, a submarine commander's dream shot. Enright quickly began sketching her unfamiliar profile, his hands trembling with adrenaline. Suddenly, a destroyer thundered overhead, her damaged sonar completely failing to detect the Americans lurking below. Though the close call cost them a minute, Shinano continued to fill the periscope view. Finally, at 1,400 yards, everything aligned. The hunt was over. Now, it was time to attack with no hesitation. The submarine shuddered as the first torpedo burst from its tube, racing through black water at 46 knots. 8 seconds crawled by before the second, third, and fourth went off, each comprising 3,000 pounds of high explosive packs. Through the periscope, Enright watched the wakes arrow toward their target before he checked his watch one final time. 3:17 a.m. on November 29, 1944. Get to it. Captain Abe was standing on Shinano's bridge, calculating just how many hours until dawn would expose them to B-29s when the first torpedo struck. The sheer explosion lifted the stern, sending a shudder through 70,000 tons of steel and transforming the empty fuel reservoir into a flooding compartment. Only 8 seconds later, another impact amidships obliterated the starboard engine room. The third punched through the hull directly into boiler room number 3, rushing in seawater as a flood cascaded into adjacent fire rooms. Finally, the fourth torpedo punched through the air compressor room, destroying one of the damaged control stations and rupturing fuel tanks. 4 catastrophic hits, all within 30 seconds. Abe gripped the bridge rail, forcing his voice steady as he yelled, quote, "Enemy torpedoes, gentlemen. Sound battle stations, all hands. Damage control status reports immediately. Casualties. Get to it." Just then, as he looked forward, he noticed the horizon tilted at an unnatural angle. Now, he knew, his unsinkable carrier was already listing. Below decks, chaos erupted. Executive Officer Mikami fought through corridors where wind howled like a typhoon as air was forced out by incoming water. The list increased to 13 degrees in seconds as he waded through rising oil-slicked water. Civilian workers pushed past in blind panic. Barbers, laundrymen, Korean laborers who couldn't understand Japanese commands, some already trapped behind jammed hatches. For a brief moment, Abe remained somewhat optimistic, his intentions to do everything possible to right his beloved ship. However, Engineer Miura knew the truth. According to him, quote, "The torpedoes pierced the hull like fists through a shoji screen." But Shinano was still making 18 knots. Water pressure multiplied exponentially. The untested bulkheads buckled like paper. Compartments flooded. The pumps screamed, then failed entirely. Over the loudspeaker, Captain Abe ordered Suin, which called all hands to the flight deck. He meant to say Kuin instead, calling for civilians only. The slip saved hundreds of desperate sailors. Mikami returned to the bridge, uniform soaked, face grave, confirming the damage. 3 of the hits struck the citadel. Shinano's heart, including boilers, engines, steering, communications, and more. Still, Abe maintained his confident demeanor, ordering a distress signal, quote, "Shinano torpedoed at 0317, exposition 108 miles, bearing 198 degrees from Omaizaki Light." But officers exchanged knowing glances. The captain who dismissed American torpedoes now commanded a dying ship. Abandoned ship. Below them, Archerfish dove deep as destroyers circled above, their depth charges exploding harmlessly in the darkness. For 20 minutes, Enright's crew listened to the ocean's testimony, distant explosions mixing with the deep groaning of a massive ship breaking apart. As dawn approached, Abe tried to order a desperate course change northwest, trying to beach Shinano at the nearby Cape Ushio, all while the Pacific water continued to invade all through the ship. However, by 9 a.m., she was completely motionless and listing 20 degrees. Destroyers Kamikaze and Isakaze attempted towing, but their combined 5,000 tons simply moved the waterlogged giant. Just after 10, Abe ordered everyone to abandon ship. As sailors struggled in oil-slicked water, the nearby Yukikaze's captain instructed his crew to rescue only those who remained calm, leaving the panicked floating aimlessly in the burning sea. Only 47 minutes later, a mere 17 hours after leaving Tokyo Bay, Shinano rolled past her point of recovery, capsizing with sickening slowness, her stern sliding beneath the waves first. Through it all, the always honorable Captain Abe remained on his bridge, choosing the captain's traditional end. With him went 1,434 others, sailors, yard workers, and civilians who believed they were sailing on Japan's salvation. When dawn finally broke and USS Archerfish surfaced in the morning light, the ocean stretched empty in every direction. Making sure there was not a single trace of the 70,000-ton giant that had filled these waters just hours before, Enright swept the horizon one last time through his binoculars, then lowered them slowly, allowing himself a smile before the crew inside the submarine erupted in cheers and claps. Back at Pearl Harbor, Naval Intelligence credited Archerfish with sinking the cruiser. No one in the Admiralty believed a carrier could have been operating in those waters. However, after reviewing Enright's periscope sketches and detailed drawings of the massive target, the Navy revised their assessment, a 28,000-ton carrier, though they still underestimated by more than half. Archerfish received the Presidential Unit's citation. Enright finally got his Navy Cross and the redemption he'd sought since failing with Shokaku. His crew knew they'd torpedoed something enormous, but submarine warfare offered few confirmations. They sailed on to their next patrol, the true magnitude of their achievement still unknown. Only after Japan's surrender did the full truth emerge. Intelligence officers combing through Imperial Navy records discovered what Archerfish had actually destroyed. The largest warship built during the entire war, which survived less than 1 day at sea, all due to a submarine 50 times smaller. Upon learning the truth, Fleet Admiral Chester W. Nimitz offered his assessment, quote, "It is fitting that an American submarine should climax the undersea campaign against Japanese warships by sending down the new queen of the Imperial Navy, before she had an opportunity to come into action." Thanks again to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to reduce your digital footprint and take back control of your personal data, click the link in the description and use code DARKSEAS for 20% off. Let Delete Me help you clean up what's been left behind.